Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Let everybody connect to their audio. Thanks for being here. Great. So let's get started. I'm Rebecca, and I'm the communications wizard here at Round Sky. Thanks for joining us for this introductory session on what it takes to get confident cooperative facilitation, or at least two lessons on that. And you're in the right place if you're wanting to be able to facilitate and make progress while also being inclusive and cooperative with the people on your team, both holding that balance. And we know that collaboration can be really hard. And we also know that it gets easier with skills and patience and tools that hold you and your team in the complexity. And we also know that it's really important and worth it. One thing that a client of ours has shared after working with us is that they didn't realize that sharing leadership and cooperating could be learned. They thought that their personality wasn't right for it, that they needed to be the right personality in order to collaborate. And we at Round Sky believe that's not the case. And so many of you know us, that we really believe that tools can help us of all different personalities collaborate. And that's part of what we're bringing today, that belief. So a lot of you look familiar, so welcome. And for folks who don't know us, I just wanted to share two quick things about us that I'd love for you to remember. So one is that Round Sky is a remotely operated, worker-owned cooperative, meaning we're a business where all the workers own it together, financially and managementally. And we believe that there are two main training opportunities when developing leadership and facilitation. And we combine the two, which is, I think, somewhat unique to us. First is that tools and processes that we teach, which we call collab, are really important. But even if those tools were perfect, and I'm not saying that they are, but if they were, we still need the second piece, which is personal development, to build self-awareness and emotional intelligence into our facilitation. So we hold both the tools and personal development as super key to the work. And the second thing I want to share about us is that we approach our work through courses and trainings, and with that focus on both the hard skills and tools and those soft skills and personal development. And our main strategic initiative is the Cooperative Leadership Certification Program, CLCP for short. And our students and clients have helped shape this training and really pinpointed those key spaces that help to build facilitator confidence and capacity in cooperation specifically. So you'll hear us reference some of the tools that we teach within this course and how to go deeper with some of them. And if what we offer today really resonates with you, this might be your next step, possibly, and you can talk to me about setting up an interview to see if it's the right fit. And those applications are being accepted through next Friday, April 23rd, the end of April, almost. Wild. So many of us are on Zoom a lot these days, but I want to touch on some quick logistics about this webinar before we get too far. So the session is being recorded and will be shared with you afterwards. So if you want to review anything, we will take questions throughout, and we have some time at the end to answer them. So if we don't get to them right away, we will take some time and try to answer as many as possible. So you can put those in the chat box, which should be at the top of your screen since I'm sharing mine, and you should have a notification of Daniel's chat message that you can bring open. And if you have any tech issues, you can message me, Rebecca Fisher-McGinty with Round Sky Solutions, and I will do my best to help you. And everyone's on mute right now. That's really great. We'll have some time for raising hands for questions, so feel free to do that. And I'll let you know that you can unmute your mic. So with that, I'd love to hear from you and get a little bit deeper into who's on the call. So love to hear your name, your pronouns, and your location, and also what brought you to this call today. And each of us, myself, Daniel, and Jamie, My co-presenters, co-hosts are going to share in the chat box as well. So we can all say hello to each other in there, and I'll mute myself for a second. So you'll see the three of us have introduced ourselves. I'm in New Orleans. My coworkers, I live in Vermont. And please do share a bit about yourself, your name, pronouns, location, and what brought you to this call today. It doesn't have to be super deep. Could just be curious. So no one has high expectations yet. Welcome, Jenny from St. Paul. Glad to have you here. Sarah's here. Two Sarahs are here. One is from Boston and from Maryland. Welcome. You're on the same wavelength, posting at the same time. Katie from California. Jen from Asheville. Nice. Learning about consent-based governance. Folks are curious about being more authentic and collaborative and co-creative in their workshops. Beautiful. Advancing equity and family stability. Nice. Well, thank you for being here, everybody. And feel free to connect with each other in the chat box. Use this as an opportunity to say hello to other folks who are doing similar work or have similar questions as you or who are in your neighborhood. And I'm going to keep us going here. And I'm going to pass it to Daniel to kind of help us arrive presently. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as well.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for that. It's nice to be arriving with you all. And for myself, one of the things that I find is super important for kind of my facilitator confidence is like to feel grounded and to feel just present and like resourced in myself as I enter into a new situation. And heck, this is a new situation. Here I am, you know, in front of all of you people in a certain sense. And so I'd like to take a moment to just kind of ground myself. And I would invite you all to just do whatever works for you in terms of like, you may know your body and your mind better than I do, of course. But I'll offer some suggestions which you can take up or just do your own thing to arrive more completely. One of the things I like to do is to start with breath, sometimes a little sound, and that long exhale and a little bit of noise sometimes really helps to settle my nervous system. So just an invitation to take a moment with your breath. And from there, I often like to just kind of like, in a sense, like follow the breath down to my feet, you know, that sense of grounding and feeling my connection to the earth, whatever that is, to the chair that I'm sitting on, to the floor under my feet, and just kind of feeling like I'm arriving in my own space. I didn't mention you can close your eyes or keep them open if you like, but just it is the opportunity to just kind of connect for a moment to your own self. You know, how are you? How am I as I arrive here? And after a moment of just kind of sensing into ourselves, there's also all of the rest of us here. So an invitation to, you know, if you close your eyes, open them and kind of look out and look at the gaze, like there's the names and faces and screenshots of the people on the call. And just imagining like, oh, wow, who are these people? What am I, what being curious, like people from all over the country, the world, I don't know where, I haven't read all of the little intros enough yet, to know them, but from all over, who are these people? What are we all doing here together? Some kind of curiosity, cultivating that as a part of arriving. Yeah, thank you. I feel a little more grounded myself. I hope you do too.
Thanks, Daniel. And thanks for that invitation to also see who else is here. And not everyone has their videos on, of course, but seeing their pictures, their names, just kind of like welcoming them to this space by acknowledging that they're also here. So thanks everybody for being here. And I wanted to get a little bit more into what you're bringing with you. And I'd love to hear everybody came here for a reason, of course, some curiosity and maybe a specific challenge you're thinking about. And I'd love to hear from you about what are some of the challenges you're facing, or what are the pieces that maybe are blocking you from feeling that confidence, or what are you looking for? So I'm going to share my screen for that clear question for you. And I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. And then we're going to take that and work with it in a second. But would love to start here. And I will provide an example. So one of the challenges that I see to getting confident facilitation is not knowing where my power or my boundaries are as a facilitator. Specifically, sometimes that leads to not knowing when the loudest person in the room is kind of taking over, or power dynamics that show up around personality and race and gender and class, and that unchecked power that shows up in our conversations in our meetings. So not knowing where my boundaries are and feeling unsure about where to go is a challenge that I have experienced. So there's one example, and I'd love to hear yours. And if you would like to raise your hand, if you'd like to share it live, if that's easier for you, that's welcome. We'll take maybe one or two of those. So we have encouraging my organization to adopt new methods of working together, how to get people to try something new when you're having a challenge. That's a big one. Want to be sure the event is a good use of everyone's time and want them to be fun. Yeah, that could be challenging, especially when there's so much happening. How to have adaptive facilitation styles, different ones that work with different groups, feel stuck in one style. Thanks for sharing that. Decision-making processes. Yeah, decision-making can be challenging. When facilitation and training blurs together, it's hard to know when I'm expected to know things and versus let the knowledge emerge from the group, right? And know how to maybe get the knowledge from the group and how to synthesize it might be a step there. Afraid of others feeling like I'm directing the conversation too much or shutting certain people's styles down. Absolutely. There's definitely a theme around what I shared here, I'm seeing. How to contribute to the conversation with my own opinions, but not overly control the flow of conversation. How to overcome all those power dynamics you mentioned, race, gender, etc., during the decision-making process, especially when you need to reach group consensus. Yes. Nice. Well, thank you for sharing. And we are going to offer a sense of what might help you frame how to make change, and then get into what could be the next step for you. So I will pass it to Daniel, and hold that challenge that you're having. Don't forget it.
Don't hold it too tight, just lightly. It's there's a lot to learn. It's a complex, beautiful life in a certain way. So So I wanted to just offer some, possibility, like a reframe of like, different kinds of learning that might be able to help us. How can we, go deep? How can we broaden our skills and our abilities and our capacities in a variety of ways? And how can we go deep as well with those? And, how can we, there's both changing, it's kind of intuitively obvious, but there's both changing like our skills and like the tasks and the tools and the procedures, all that kind of stuff that we, all the details of what we need to learn. And then there's like, what do we need to bring to the table as a person and as to have what we're representing go better, right? So it's kind of intuitively obviously there's these different domains of change, and this guy Ron Hafiz, I think he worked at, I'm not sure, I think it was Harvard Education or something like that. He came up with this distinction between technical change or technical learning and adaptive change or adaptive learning. And it's a useful distinction to kind of keep in mind that there are some kinds of change that really require or there's sort of the solution to a particular dilemma, in a sense, is something that's been worked with before a lot. It's been something that's been that people have a solid approach to and procedure for. And so we might think of technical change as being the kind of like adopting a new procedure or learning a new skill set. It could be very complicated, or it could be simpler. It could be as complicated as like learning to fly an airplane or something, but there's whole bodies of study about like step by step, this is what you need to learn to get to be able to have the skills to know this and to know that, to be able to do this even very complex task. On the other hand, there's adaptive change, which is really like, how do I need to grow to become bigger or deeper, change myself in a certain way to have the capacities to be able to take on the challenges that I face. And it could be a personal growing or adaptation, or it could be a group, an organization might have a similar kind of dilemma. Like the whole organization needs to shift in some way it's not clearly defined. It's not something that can be just kind of written down in a procedure or a lesson plan. It's more of a change of way of being, in a sense. And using that little airplane analogy, it might be more like, I really want to fly, but I have whatever, the fear of heights or something. Like, what do I need to do to like become the person that I need to be to do this well? So these are these kind of two distinctions, and wanted to give I just want to say these both apply both on an individual level and on an organizational level. Today, we'll mostly be talking about it in terms of our own individual journey as, learning to become more competent and confident facilitators and trainers and things like that, working with our teams. So that's what I wanted to say. So I wanted to maybe give an example, like if we use some of the examples that, we came up with earlier, like Rebecca mentioned that, not knowing where your boundaries are as a facilitator. Some ways to learn about this from a point of view of like, what does Rebecca need to learn to do this? Might be more about learning best practices about facilitation. And that might be more of a technical change, like to really study, like, these are the types of practices and, kind of policies around facilitation that have worked really well for others, and I can adopt those. And it's a technical change in a sense. But there might be a big adaptive change in there too, where it's more like, I need to learn how to ask hard questions to the group, like, what power should the facilitator have in our organization? Maybe that's charged for some reason, or it is for me. And so how do I learn to take on the courage and the capacity to bring forward a really difficult conversation that the group needs to have to clarify where the boundaries are, or something like that, right? So that would be a much more adaptive kind of level of change. Yes, and similarly, the challenge that I put into the chat box is like, how do I encourage my organization to adopt new methods? It's common, folks come to our courses and they want to like implement some of this stuff, and part of it might be the learning process of like, again, like learning learning some tools from Colab or something like that, that gives this kind of like shorthand and systems for how to think about moving through a meeting, for instance. The flow of a meeting might be more of a technical solution for a facilitator's skill set, but the other side might be the adaptive change. Again, maybe especially like in my case, I'm a little bit shy. So it might be like, how do I get my organization to change? I need to learn to kind of represent my ideas and bring forward my concerns and bring that to the group in a certain way. And that might be an adaptive change for me. Of course, that might be totally different for someone else. They might have the adaptive change. They might be like already bringing their ideas so much to the group, nobody wants to listen to them or something. So they need to figure out a way to like dial in a different way and listen more or something like that. So the adaptive change obviously is very unique and individual to each person in each situation. Yeah, so I hope that gives some examples of like what we're talking about, these distinctions between technical and adaptive change.
Nice. Thanks, Daniel. I really love that that distinction about maybe we focus too. This could then mean, what do you tend to go to? Are you only thinking about what steps to learn, or maybe it takes a step aside to see the change? So I'd love to come back to these challenges that you all mentioned and have you name for yourself what are some of the pieces that you think are involved in addressing this challenge for yourself. And is this technical? Is that change adaptive? Is it both? What pieces are needed here? And I'll give you about like a minute or so to think, have some silence to think about what your first thought is, and then we'll take some time to digest a couple of those. And if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand. Welcome to folks who just came in. We're taking some time to think about your facilitator challenge and what is needed to address it. And if you don't understand technical or adaptive change, that's okay. We'll bring you up to speed in a second. But name a challenge for yourself and think about what's needed to address it. What's your sense, your best sense? All right. Well, I'd love to, if anyone would like to share, you can raise your hand. You can put your reflection in the chat box as well. And if you have a question that came out of that, that's also welcome. Or if it's not, I know a minute, you can only get so far. All right, thank you, Rosetta. My challenge is keeping the meeting creative, not just focused on business. This would be an adaptive change, as I would like to see others more to our meetings while creating a cohesive team. And Daniel or Jamie, if you want to jump in and share any reflections on what you're seeing, that's welcome.
Yeah, Carol's talking about a mixture of technical and adaptive change. And I think that's really often the case. Oftentimes we really need new skills, some specific kind of like knowledge and capacity that's very kind of skill-based. And then we also need to be able to implement that. We need to be able to make that real in some way through our actual efforts. And And often that's more of an adaptive change.
Mm.
Yeah, I guess I would just add, in reading Rosetta's challenge, that often what I hear in the case where an adaptive change is a key component is this line, I know what I need to do, and for some reason I just can't do it. Right. And that can be a thing to look at. Like what would be the action or the information that you need as an organization to be more creative, right? And then what's going on in the organization's culture or in some of the individuals there that are sort of disrupting that or resisting that, because that's really important too.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'm thinking about Rosetta's again and keeping the meeting creative, not just focused on business. There may be pieces of this tension-driven meeting that resonate with creating moments for creativity that isn't on you necessarily, that feels cohesive. And there's something about having a structure that then can offer creativity, like a canvas for your paint in some ways. So want to offer that. And trusting that I can be present and respond to what changes and giving people the space to ask for what they need and trusting that they will do that. Katie, that is a great challenge and a way to address it. And there may be ways in what we're speaking about today too that might offer, sometimes trusting something is knowing what will happen with what they offer up, knowing how you'll work with the changes and how to respond to changes, having like some tools in your tool belt to be able to respond, if that makes sense, while not having the answer necessarily, but knowing how to guide it. So I will pass it to Daniel to give you a little bit of a quick homework piece, if you'd like to continue thinking about this specific piece.
Yes, I was thinking about this earlier. I was thinking, wow, this would be a great little worksheet. Maybe we should make a little worksheet. Well, I just put it on the slide here. Just this idea of a 3-column exercise of like, what's your challenge? What are, like, make a list of some of the ways you could address this challenge. Those in a sense could be potential change goals in a sense, right? Like what do I need to do in a sense, or learn, or encourage, to make progress with my challenge that's up at the top. And then, okay, so what part of this is technical change and what part of this is adaptive change? The change goal of really learning some new process tools to hold us in our efforts together. And the technical challenge is kind of obvious, like learning, a bunch of group process procedures and things like that. And for me, the adaptive change might be like, if I'm in a course, like actually doing my homework might be the adaptive change or something. So yeah, but creating a list and filling it in, journaling on this kind of thing, I think is really valuable to kind of begin to unpack and understand the territory of what we want to do to improve our skills and our capacity to bring it in the way we want to.
Nice. So that is our first step. And now we're going to switch gears a bit, which actually works really beautifully with some of the challenges you're having. And I'm going to pass it to Jean, or actually, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the tools that we use to address these different areas of facilitation. And I'm going to be pretty quick, and then we're going to dive much deeper into a specific tool, which is tension-driven meetings. So the second big lesson is just to have tools and processes in order to lean on, to hold your complexity, that both and it's really great if your team also knows and they know what to expect. So in our culture currently that has a history of autocratic leadership and really normalizing white supremacist culture, that this really forms a basis for how we think about power and leadership in our organizations, whether it's super conscious or if it's behind the scenes. So these ways run pretty deep, and we need new tools for creating new ways of leading and new ways of cooperating that are that we all understand and are kind of rewiring us in some ways. So we like to think that on our way that we kind of need a map enough to navigate that power. So what we use to navigate power dynamics and power flows is this thing called the power matrix. And it's really helpful that we all understand it within our organization and know how we might shift power, which ways would we go to navigate these inevitable dynamics that come up. And then the second is experimenting into how we are going to communicate, how are we going to collaborate and get alignment. So that is through our living agenda, which Jamie is going to talk a bit about one piece of that. And then how will we decide? How will we get to our decisions about what is next for us, our patterns, our policies, our agreements, when we're moving from this more hierarchical standpoint or maybe more deliberation style to a process and structure that really holds us. So we have a decision-making process that I can share more about at the end if you're curious, but just know that this is a really key point to be really clear on. And then another thing that we focus on is also accountability. How do we shift dynamics where people are really showing up and owning their work? So these are some of the pieces that we talk about in the course. And so that's a little overview, a big picture of all of the multiple pieces. And I'm going to pass it to Jamie now to talk more about, to zoom into the specific lesson.
Right. So thank you, Rebecca. And you know, as I start to talk about tension-driven meetings, one of the things you can notice is if you experienced a little bit of tension, as I was saying that, because that's really normal. And, you know, there can be this recoil of like, oh no, right? There's tension in the room, there's tension between people. And we want to sort of shift the approach to that. And one way you can start thinking about that is if you think about a time where you're really excited about something, or you were getting ready to speak about something that mattered to you, right? You can feel in your body actually this sort of charging or tensing up that's getting ready for some sort of activity. And we'll get more into the specifics of that soon, but to just be clear, that's a big piece of what I'm referring to when I talk about tensions. And an essential link that I want to make to what Rebecca was talking about with the power matrix, which I'd recommend, it's a very useful tool. But one of the main ideas in the power matrix is that if we want to effectively change the patterns that are active in an organization, especially the ones that aren't working for folks, then one of the first steps is to start to make them visible, right? We want to take assumptions that we have as individuals or the organization has and shine a light on them so that they become more explicit and clear. And that way we can more effectively take responsibility for the way things are and start to get a clear sense of what's actually going to shift this dynamic. And when we talk about tension-driven meetings, that's one of these key ways we do it, right? Because it's a structure that's about bringing the things that are kind of bubbling under the surface in an organization to the forefront so that we can start to work with them directly. And as I'm sure many of you guessed, there needs to be a healthy, effective process to do this so that it's not overwhelming to individuals or to the organization, but there's actually a confidence like, oh, it's okay to bring this stuff up. It's important. It's adding value. So before I go further, I just want to name with meetings in general, right? There's a reason why a lot of people hate them. Or are frustrated by them. And that's because meetings can act as amplifiers for whatever dynamics are going on. And again, that amplification can be conscious or unconscious. It can be assumed or it can be clear. And especially if one person is dictating the agenda of the meeting, there's a lot more room for more assumptions to be built into how it goes. Whereas if that's really given to the group and the group's core issues are the focus of the meeting, they're driving the meeting, in other words, it not only becomes clearer what we're working with in the meeting, but I think it also helps folks stay more engaged, that this is actually about what's deeply meaningful to them instead of something that's being handed down, right? And yeah, so to speak about tensions a little more, I really like this metaphor of archery, right? That when you think of the bowstring of a bow, right, to actually have impact, to make that arrow fly, you have to create tension. And that's what I mean, that tension has this negative connotation, but it's really anything that's preparing for some kind of meaningful activity. And like the bow and arrow, it really depends on where you're pointing it, right? You could be pointing it at the bullseye. You could be pointing it in a completely different direction. You could be pointing it at a person, right? And depending on that, it could have completely different results. And we want, ideally, we want that tension to be clear so that we're really using the force or power of enactment here. But at the same time, we also want to have processes that are really directing that force in a place that's generative or healthy for the organization and the individuals within it. So, this loops back to a reason why people avoid bringing creative potential to the table, right? Speaking about creativity. Is because it might be unclear what could come up. There's a fear of overwhelming themselves or the group, right? Especially if that creative potential is sitting in someone in a painful way. Like, I'm not getting my voice heard, or there's something going on, some dynamic that's inappropriate or problematic, or we're not getting the work done that we said we would, right? All of these are creative potentials. But if someone's been sitting on that for a while and there isn't an avenue of expression, it can get really uncomfortable. And there can sort of be this fear that, hey, we'll bring these things up and then the group won't have a way of metabolizing it or dealing with it. And what do we do there, right? And I would suggest that, and probably many of you have experienced this when tensions erupt, right? They've been sitting below the surface and then they kind of explode. And how different that is from when folks are really comfortable being able to voice something, even if it's intense, right? Because there's this trust and confidence that we'll be able to hold this and that voice is invited. So a principle behind this that I'd like to share, which is one we talk about in our training, and the term comes from permaculture, is waste equals food, right? And that's just this idea that in ecosystems, right, there isn't any waste. A lot of what we would consider waste gets composted, gets reused, it becomes fuel. And in our tension-driven meetings, we're trying to use the same principles, that things that we might have the inclination to say, this is a problem, let's sweep this under the rug, this isn't relevant, right? If it's charged, if it has meaning for someone, we want to see that as potential energy that we can tap into as a group to grow in a more healthy, effective way collectively. And, as I mentioned, you can have all of these really wonderful tools for processing the tensions that people have. But people also the people in the group need to have confidence that they can bring their tensions to the table and that they'll actually be met and that there will be an effective process for, again, metabolizing these tensions or working with them. And one note I'd like to add is, as a facilitator, in the method that we're teaching, it's not the facilitator's job to identify the tensions and to resolve them, right? The facilitator is there to have a deep understanding of how to surface and hone in on tensions and how to work with them so they can help the individuals who bring the tensions to the table feel really met and feel like we can work together to find that process. And in general, in the meeting practice we're using, the facilitator's power is in managing the process, where the individuals on that team are really, their power is in managing the content and managing their own tensions. Great. So, one of the things to get specific here, I want to talk about this, what we're thinking of as an optimal flow for tension-driven meetings, right? We call this our standard meeting practice. And, the idea is that this is going to give people the opportunity to kind of, if you look at the agenda processing section and agenda building section, to have a space to really surface tensions and have that drive the meeting, and the content of the meeting, and also have effective methods for moving it forward. And at the same time, these sections above and below the main part of the meeting are really about clearing out and solidifying any details that need to be figured out before we get into the heart of the meeting. And then also really integrating what happens. So any sort of change or progress that we've made doesn't get lost, but we actually capture that work and keep it moving, right? So that it actually becomes a part of our organization. So there's this interesting idea, right? Why are we framing agenda items as tensions, right? Especially when that word kind of has a charge to it. One of the reasons for using that charge is, again, starting to normalize that whether what someone has to bring to the table is really pleasant and enjoyable for the group, or whether it's really challenging, it's still valuable and it's still kind of coming from the same place, right? Something needs to be named and worked with, and that's what we're trying to do. Another reason why we're having folks on a team build the agenda with their tensions is, it helps balance the power dynamic. And as I said, it helps keep people engaged. Also, as a facilitator of this work, your job is not to figure everything out, right? But your job is to, again, help the group sense these tensions. You don't have to mind read or guess what's relevant, because when you start to normalize that the ideas that folks bring are useful, people will bring relevant content to the meeting. And then again, your job is to sort and try to process it. All of this is on behalf of building engagement in a team, but also building confidence that, again, if someone has an issue, they really can voice it and they won't be labeled as a problem. And the team is not going to sort of melt down by too many unclear tensions happening at once, because there's a really clear process for sorting those out and working through them in a way that we can actually manage and metabolize as an organization. So, we can use a quick how-to, and we use what's called a living agenda, which we'll share the template for. And everyone on the team can see and edit this living agenda. And this is where we place our tensions during the agenda building phase of the meeting. And this can seem a little bit complex, right? How to surface tensions, but it really becomes second nature, and it becomes a very simple, intuitive process for a team. And once folks are familiar with this, they can also add agenda items beforehand. So there's nothing wrong with building the agenda previously, but it's setting this precedent that everyone can contribute to it, right? And once the agenda is built, the idea is we build it first, and then each tension is introduced in 10 seconds or less, right? And each tension has what we're calling a tension holder. And there's a single person holding that tension. It's usually the person who brings the item up. And the importance of this is that folks are really responsible for the issues that they bring up in terms of voicing them. And they also have power to determine whether or not this is resolved for them. So it's not up to someone who already has power in the organization to say, hey, this is resolved for you, right? It's resolved when the tension holder really feels, hey, this is being addressed here. All right, so when the agenda is built, then the facilitator sort of manages the process of choosing an item and inviting the tension holder to give more detail as needed to introduce their item. And that's the basis of how we do the agenda portion of tension-driven meetings. Nice.
The first few steps. So I wanted to share, thanks, Jamie, and really tension-driven meetings are I'm learning more and more that they're one of my favorite pieces of the work that we do. And I want to kind of concretize this for you all. So here are some examples. Attention really can be anything. If you're really having some challenges with that, you can replace the word agenda item with tension for now, although there are some differences, but for now you can just use that synonym. So one example of attention I might put on the agenda is emails to the info at, so info@Round Sky Solutions. And that somebody needs to respond to them. We're all holding this, maybe we're all holding this implicitly that whoever responds first will respond. If that sounds familiar, if your organization, I'm sorry, maybe this is your solution. So that might be I want to address that kind of implicitness as an attention that I'm feeling. Another one, Jamie might bring an opportunity to build leadership, to build his leadership skills or our skills together. So he would introduce it to say, what's behind it? What's the tension that maybe he learned about something? Maybe he wants us all to look up different opportunities to build our leadership together. So that's a tension, and different things can come out of it. And then Daniel might bring another tension to the agenda of partnering with another cooperative. So this tension could be about an idea to expand upon our work and to cooperate with other cooperatives living out that value of cooperation among co-ops. So these are some examples of different tensions that people might bring to their meeting. And I wanted to give you a second to think about what kind of tensions would you bring to your meeting. And maybe you already have some top of mind. If you do, you're welcome to put them. And if we'll take maybe a few minutes here to kind of start surfacing those together about getting your wheels turning. So I offered you a few examples, and feel free to put in the chat box ones that you might bring to your meeting. And we have some kind of implicitly brought up in some ways about finding the balance between planning and creativity. Maybe that's a tension you're feeling that you want to bring to your meeting. If you're confused, raise your hand, and maybe you'll clear it up for someone else on the call. So right now we're populating the chat box with tensions that you might bring to your organization. How to draw more people to our network and to our meetings. That's a great one. Yeah, that could, and then depending on how you introduce that could lead to so many different ideas from the group or in different outputs that could come out of that. That's a little foreshadowing. Soliciting input from meeting participants. Yeah, that might become an agreement about what you do going forward. Sarah tends to bring up logistical issues, discussing about our own governance or processes. Important, and those, I'm not sure what your situation is, but sometimes those people who bring up logistical issues, it then becomes on them to figure out what the solution is. And this kind of bridges the individual with the collective in some ways. I'm bringing the tension on behalf of the group, and we together are going to figure that out about what's next. When and how to support group communication between formal meetings. Nice. Yeah, these are great tensions. Go ahead, Daniel.
So great. And I just wanted to jump in and say that one of the keys, facilitator skills when working with, tensions like this is to if someone puts something on the agenda that says this, and the next question is, well, what's the tension behind that? Like what is it you're actually trying to get at? Someone may already have like the idea for the solution, or they may have a very much more detailed question. It might not mean anything like what you think it does. And so the question of like getting to what the actual tension is so key to actually resolving what the person's actually wanting to get resolved.
Yeah, and the difference between that and actually this is a great segue into an example that I had in reflecting with one of our past students. So I'll go forward. So I was reflecting with one of our past students on some of the experiences they had, and they were sharing with me that they really felt that the way that this process systematized a way to include everyone, that everyone was included, not just asking them, please, like, you can bring your agenda item, add it to the agenda beforehand. This changed the dynamic for them, where people were really expected and welcome to bring up their tensions. And they were saying that this was a weight off their shoulders, that they didn't have to bring all the important questions or have all the answers. And it helped them to live out that value of collaboration, to hold these tensions together and hold it as something really important. And also the shift from the focus to the facilitator kind of holding all the agenda items, or some people holding some, shifting that to a tension holder, someone who is in charge of that tension. You saw our names in the example that helped them address better this culture that they had created, where they really got to hold those and own what comes out of it together. That person owns that tension, owns the challenge, and is like a spokesperson in some way, not to make it sound too intense, but a spokesperson for filling the gap, and the group supports them in that. So that, I think that's pretty beautiful, like a beautiful shift. But this is the first step. So Jamie's going to share just a little sneak peek about, well, what do we do with that once you have the tensions? It's really important to trust that it's going to be held and dealt with. So I'll pass it to Jamie.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, this is really crucial because, again, many people have experienced what it's like when there are a lot of different tensions or needs that all come up at once. And again, part of surfacing tensions in this way is to kind of break them down and sort of stagger how we deal with things. But another crucial piece is that this charge that's being expressed has an effective process to help it move to resolution, whether that resolution is a couple different people reconnecting with each other, or whether that's a project that folks are making progress on and outlining next actions, or whether that's a change in policy or a change in the role that someone's playing in an organization. And in our training, we outline a bunch of different ways to process tensions, but the simplest way is what we're calling pattern, project, and person. You can see it at the top of the screen here. And one of the things I like about this, what it's implying is that these are 3 different types of tensions that really need a different process to move them forward. And what we're calling pattern is a pattern that affects the whole team and organization, is kind of sustained through time. So this could be a change to the business model, or a change to role accountabilities, or a new policy or procedure. And the important piece here is that we need some sort of consensus around this. Right? It can't just be left up to one person. Everyone who's affected on the team needs a process to be able to weigh in on a pattern. Whereas a project, again, the output is more about details of specific work that needs to get done, and that work getting done. And so that needs a different process, right? It's really about identifying the new projects and next actions rather than coming to a shared conclusion. Right? And then a person-related tension, this is really crucial, is more about connection or disconnection between people, or work that someone needs to do on themselves in order to move this issue forward. And the reason why it's so crucial to make these distinct is because you can often get these hydra tensions that have these multiple heads, right? They have an aspect of each of these ones, and when you try to deal with all of them together, it can be extremely overwhelming. Right? Whereas when you can really separate out what's a pattern, what's a project, what's a person, then you can apply the effective process that's going to help move it forward.
Nice. Yeah, this is a hefty document image for you. So you will get the slides if because the more you look at it, the more you find out. So take it step by step. And I'm going to zoom in for a quick second using those same examples. If we're sorting these out, if we're thinking about what kind of outputs, what process would this need, what kind of outputs might come out of this. This first one, emails to the info at. So what could be happened is the need to just create a role that someone holds this, create a new process. So this would be a pattern, somebody who holds this role, who responds to the emails and is expected to do that. So then it's not stuck in implicit zone. And maybe that answered your question, Stephanie, but we can get into it more also. And so for the next one, opportunity to build leadership. This tension from Jamie could be possibly a new pattern, depending on what his tension is, a new pattern of taking up leadership together over time, or it may be this opportunity for personal development for himself or for somebody on the team to take this up and bring and show the rest of the collective what kind of changes have been made. So that could be an opportunity there, and not always about changing negative behavior. And the last item, partnering with another cooperative. Let's say that this tension is noticing an opportunity to host an event specifically. So this could result in an output of a new project. could just be that somebody that takes this project up. It's already in their wheelhouse. So those are some examples. And really the core is what the tension was in the first place of what the output would be and what the process would be used to do that. So that's a quick example. And we're going to get to questions in a second, but I want to just zoom back out. We've kind of gone over a lot of content today. So I wanted to zoom back out and talk about some of the takeaways. So one of the big takeaways is to go deep, leverage both technical change and adaptive change. If you're finding yourself going to one way only, maybe just consider the multiple ways you can make change. And then the second is to learn and use a set of tools to hold your facilitation that matches with your values. We've offered you some tools today that if that resonates with you, great, and we're happy to share more. But the bigger picture is just to find some tools that you trust and that work for you. And if you like what we've offered today, you could consider our course. It has so many different aspects of facilitation. And your next step would be to think about what your leadership needs to build that confidence, what pieces are there for you. And also know that this change often takes time. And that's part of why we've made our course 10 weeks, that we know that change happens over a period of time. And with really tangible projects and learning from each other, we can make some pretty transformational framework shifts on some of the aspects that have been mentioned today around confidence. And then some places where it kind of is surprising, which I can share more about that if that is interesting to you. And I'll also, if you want to learn more, you can just simply check out that page. And if you want to have a conversation with me, everyone who applies gets a one-on-one to see if it's a good fit for their goals. So know that it's not a commitment, but it is that you have time to chat with me about that. So with that, we're going to open up the floor for questions, maybe specific instances that you want to work through with that 3 Ps, pattern, project, person, thought. So I wanted to open up the floor. So put your questions in there, and there's one already here that we'll start with, which is, can you give an example of a process that would be used for consent on a new policy? Great question. Daniel hasn't spoken a second, so if you feel up for answering that. If not.
Sure. I mean, Stephanie, are you still there? Do you want to chime in and ask your question out loud?
Hey, yes, I am still here. I want to thank everybody. This has been really, really insightful and helpful. The reason I'm asking is because I'm getting ready to graduate here next month, and I want to go into figuring out how to advocate for worker cooperatives. And I'm really looking into the power dynamics of them. And so over the summer, I did some social justice work in DC. And this is one of the things that I saw when we were trying to make decisions by group. It's just, how do we make those decisions going forward? And so that's just one of the questions that I had, was just how do you get consent, or what kind of process do you use to kind of get you through to get a group consensus if you want to change policy or implement a new strategy or things of that nature.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, you're really speaking, to Jamie's 3 Ps. You're really speaking to the pattern side of things. How do we shift the patterns of our shared agreements here? Things that we're going to be agreeing upon over longer periods of time. And we have a process that was briefly mentioned we call integrative consent, and it's a modified consensus, type of decision-making process. The key point is that it's a little leaner and more nimble. There's not people, you have to have a reasonable justification for making an objection to a proposal, and so streamlines preferences, being able to take action, being able to make decisions more quickly. And because we were able to make them more quickly, we can also change them again. So if the decision is not like, life or death, and we absolutely have to get it right the first time, which 95% of decisions are not like that, right? You can make a decision quickly, try it, you can change it in 3 weeks if you need to, kind of thing, right? So it's a more of a streamlined consent process. And we don't have time to teach that here, but there are some resources. There's decision-making toolkit, a little worksheet toolkit kind of thing. You probably have the link for that, Rebecca, huh? Yeah, you're on it. Communications whiz. So we have a few resources on our website, and then of course in our trainings we go into that in depth.
Can I chime in on this really quickly? Yeah, because one thing I wanted to name in addition to this is that distinction between technical and adaptive change, right? And that often entrenched power dynamics may have, it may be that you need a process that is going to highlight the dynamics and is going to support shifting them, like integrative consent really supports the tension holder. So that can be disruptive to entrenched power dynamics as well. But there may also be an adaptive quality where the organization may really have habits around certain people speaking or taking up a lot of space, right? And by starting to normalize personal development and this adaptive work, that can start to create a culture where folks can feel comfortable looking at this and starting to do work on themselves to take up less space or to listen in a different way to what other people are saying.
If you have follow-up questions, those are welcome. And great. And I think we could take one more question if other things that are burning. I know we talked about so much today, and definitely recorded this session, and you're welcome, Jonah. Other questions that are lingering? And if we didn't cover something, maybe it's something separate that you want to offer, and that is totally welcome. There is a question that came in around holding creativity while having, like, you have to get to things. How to hold creativity while you get to the things. And Daniel, Jamie, anything you want to comment on about holding that balance?
Yeah, sure. I can start. A couple of things come to mind, and one is just one of the things we try to teach in our training is like orientation, right? The ability of a facilitator and a group member to go, hey, where are we in this process, right? Because often that's not clear, and that can lead to this sort of chaos where like we're really involved in something and oh my God, we're out of time, and there can be this sense of urgency that can come in. Whereas when there's clarity, like, okay, we have 20 minutes, we're keeping track of where we're at in this process. And then when that's clear, we can start to orient to like creativity is not this cute bonus thing that we can get into if we get all like the hard details ironed out. Creativity and more of these soft skills, just like personal development work or the connections between people, these are really essential, right? And when we're clear that the process is holding us and we're aligned with it, then we can start to attend to these more sort of creative or open-ended pieces as the essential forms or pieces that they are.
That's great. That just reminded me of the idea of freedom within structure. Like that if we have a good understanding of the bounds of where we are together, then we have a lot of freedom to play. We have the sports field or something like that. We know where the boundaries are and we play well in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Jamie, did you want to add something?
There was one other piece that I think is important here, which I talk about a lot. A big part of our training that we weave in is work with somatics, which for those of you who aren't familiar is kind of body-based process, which is really valuable as a facilitator. And one of the things, one of the themes in somatics that I really like is sometimes we have like an intuitive experience, or where we know something's important. We don't necessarily have a flow chart for why, right? And to start to normalize that there may be incredible value in this. I sort of talk about the difference between conscious and unconscious change, and the difference between deliberately constructing something and kind of allowing it to emerge organically. And when you have both of these elements in an organization or as a facilitator, there's actually a lot more room for creativity to happen, right? Because I find the best moments of creativity, you set up for them, but then they emerge spontaneously. And it's like, where did that come from? That was a great idea. And with those tools, that they create a lot more room for that kind of creative emergence.
Nice. I think that is a really beautiful note to end on. Thank you both for sharing your wisdom, and everyone for attending and offering up your real life experiences and questions and comments. So if you want to reach out to any of the three of us, you're welcome to, and our emails are right there on the screen, and happy to stay in conversation or point you in the direction that we can be supportive. So have a good rest of your day, and feel free to unmute your mic and say bye-bye if you want to.
Goodbye.
Thanks.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.